Hi everyone and welcome to today's chat. My name is Trinia and I'm a team member here at Understood. And today we're going to be talking about helping kids with math. And we're lucky enough to have Elizabeth Babbin joining us today. Hi Elizabeth.
Hi, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Good, thank you.
Awesome. Do you want to take just a minute to introduce yourself to our viewers?
Sure. My name is Elizabeth Babbin. I am an instructional support teacher. I currently work at the middle school level with students in grades 6 through 8. And I'm also the chair of the math department at the middle level in my district. But I also work with students K through 12 as the director of education at the Sylvan Learning Center in Easton, Pennsylvania, where I've worked with students on helping them in math for many years.
Yes, and Elizabeth has worked with us on lots of different issues and has done several of these video chats with us before, so we're really happy to have you back. Usually we're talking about reading with you, but I'm excited today to be talking about math. And we know that kids can struggle with math for lots of different reasons, and so I'm excited to hear your thoughts and suggestions for parents of what they can do to help their kids. Before we get started, though, I do want to just let our viewers out there know we will be taking your questions. So if you have a question for Elizabeth, you can just go ahead and type it in the comments box. It's usually helpful if you can give us the age or grade of your child. That will allow Elizabeth to give a little bit more of a targeted response. But so with that in mind, let's go ahead and get started. And Elizabeth, maybe you can start by just talking about some of the different reasons that kids do struggle with math. What is it that's getting in their way?
Absolutely. It is, there are many. So I think one thing that I think we're all living in the midst of right now is just some of the shift in standards and expectations for our kids in math. Now, this is particularly an issue for our older students, but as the Common Core state standards rolled out and in some places are continuing to be implemented, we're seeing expectations for our students in math accelerate rapidly. And unfortunately, it often kind of happens overnight where, you're in 5th grade and your set of expectations is here, and then you go to 6th grade and all of a sudden they're up by 2 or 3 notches from where they were before. So that's definitely one major factor that has been occurring. Along with that shift, we have started to expect students to be able to do more in math than we have before, particularly in relation to what used to be literacy skills. So math students now need to be able to explain their answers, often in writing. They need to be able to read and understand complicated word problems that are just much more multi-step and multi-layered than the problems that they might have been exposed to in the past. So now a student who's struggling in reading may also start to struggle in math. They might understand the computational elements, but they're struggling with all of the layers of expectations that are there for them now that may not have been an issue before. And I think the other major factor is that math is very instructionally specific. So you learn different content in 3rd grade math than you do in 4th grade math. And, and that changes each year. A subject like reading builds much more progressively from year to year. So if you have a teacher who's not a great fit for a child, that you might kind of be okay through a rough year. But if you have, let's say, a substitute teacher for the year in 5th grade, when you've got really heavy fraction skills, all of a sudden hitting the table for the first time in a meaningful way, that can really derail a student's progress in math. So each year, those individual skills and their coherent instruction is just very important and can really affect a child's progress.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm wondering if you can talk about how learning disabilities, or how can we tell the difference between a child who's just having a hard time in their math class right now versus a child who maybe has a learning disability like dyscalculia and might need extra support or accommodations in school?
To be honest, that's a question that experts in the field really debate because And I think at the end of the day, the answer is sometimes we don't really know. And really, depending especially on the age of the child, if you're talking about, let's say, a late middle schooler or even a high schooler, at that point, what we know is that the child is not being successful in math. And what we have to do is give them the tools and strategies and supports in order to get them to where they need to be. Is it a disability? Is it a series of instructional problems? Is it some of the curriculum shifting? At the end of the day, we might not really know, but many of the steps that we can take to support a child who's struggling are similar, whether the root cause is a disability or one of those other factors. If we know that there's a disability for the child in other areas, for example, related to processing or dyslexia or some of the executive function pieces, then certainly we can be more assured that there's probably some of that, contributing to the learning disability side of the equation for the struggles in math. And that definitely would inform us to try to reach that student in some different ways relating to those learning differences. But it can be hard to know.
Yeah, absolutely. So it sounds like a lot of the same strategies are used for kids who are struggling with math, regardless of whether that's because of a disability or for other reasons. And so I'm wondering, can you talk through, what are some of these strategies? I'm sure that's what parents are here to learn about. What are some of the strategies that teachers can use in the classroom or that parents can look for at schools that they should be using for their kids?
So one of the things that we do know is that basic fact fluency is very important. Okay, so a child being able to know automatically, 2 + 3 is 5. And some kids really struggle with that basic fact learning and acquisition. So, the first step definitely is to really try to solidify those basic facts because they're the true building blocks of math. Just like in reading, we have to understand the letters and the sounds that the letters make to be able to blend them into words, and then we can understand what we're reading. Math is similar. If we have sort of the basic alphabet of math through those basic facts, if we have that solidified, then our mental energy is more freed up for the conceptual tasks that need to be tackled. So there are some kids, again, who just struggle tremendously with that. But I would say step one is really try in a number of different ways to address the basic fact fluency, because if the kids can get that, they will have a real leg up in their future math work. Another component is using some teaching strategies that incorporate coming back into paper a little more.
Oh, Elizabeth, hold on. I think you cut out for just a minute.
Okay.
Can you start with the second thing that you were just saying?
Sure. So as far as the teaching strategies.
Yes.
Okay. So using teaching strategies that incorporate a concrete approach to learning math is something that can be very, very effective for students who are struggling with math, whether that's through a learning disability or not. So, for example, using some of these kinds of two-sided colored tiles, there are a lot of applications for these in teaching students math that could be used in the classroom, that could be used with a tutor, or even at home. And this is generally called CRA instruction, concrete representational abstract. So as you're working with the concrete items, it's much easier for a student to visualize what is actually happening in that math problem, and then they can eventually shift into that abstract concept of, 2 + 3 is 5. You know, when I can actually see that in a concrete way, it's a different ball game.
So, Elizabeth, is this like having manipulatives, like they're able to hold something in their hand and move them around, and that's how they're learning these abstract concepts?
It is,
Okay.
but it's also a strategic instructional method using those manipulatives. So sometimes when we use manipulatives in math, it's kind of an after the fact type of thing. Like I'm looking at the word problem and then I start pulling out my tiles to see, okay, well, there's 2 cats and then there's 3 dogs. That type of thing. When you're using a CRA-based instructional method, you are starting from the ground up in a different manner in terms of the instruction. And again, this can be something that is layered on later. I mean, when I learned this method as a teacher, obviously as an adult, it made me better understand more abstract math concepts. So it's never too late to kind of go back and start working in this manner.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That's really helpful. We have a couple of parents who are asking about ADHD and how that impacts math skills, ability, and one parent was specifically saying like multiple step math problems and being able to keep track of each step and where I am in the step and what I carrying it from one step to the next step correctly. Do you have any advice for parents who are dealing with kids who have ADHD or executive function issues when it comes to math?
Definitely. And I'm glad that question came up because I should have mentioned that right at the beginning as a big factor for some kids that really contributes to their struggles with math. So there are definitely a number of things that parents can do to help kids who are struggling with ADHD make more sense of their math work. So one is to use graphic organizers that are appropriate for the skill or the problem that the student is working on. Again, some students respond very well to the use of manipulatives when they're struggling with ADHD. For some kids, they actually find them more distracting and they just turn into a fidget and a toy. So you need to know your child in terms of which way that might go and give it a try, see how that goes. Use of things like highlighters to kind of color code different parts of a problem or different components of information that will be needed for different steps in the problem can also be really helpful, especially as you're getting into those multi-step problems that older children are often encountering. Some of that color coding can be very effective. I really like using the color coding in a digital form. So if, for example, the child happens to be able to say, okay, I think this is going to be blue because I think it's related to this concept. But then if I make a mistake, I can just quickly erase that blue and replace it with yellow. Paper pencil or paper traditional highlighter, we can't do that as easily. So that's one benefit of some of the digital tools that can be useful. But my biggest suggestions for ADHD it really is the use of the graphic organizer, helping students break the problem down, stick with it throughout the problem, and helping them chunk it out using the tools and strategies that work for them. And you're going to have to experiment with that to find out what works for your child. And it might be slightly different in different types of math concepts too.
Yeah, absolutely. Those were some really great ideas. We have several more questions coming in, but one of our parents was asking if you could show those tiles again.
Sure. So these are not available for purchase because they're homemade.
Okay.
But you can buy these online too. It's just at my school we made them because it was just so much cheaper and easier. So these are really just.
Oh, can you hold them a little bit higher, actually?
Sure.
There we go. Yep.
Better?
Yes.
Okay, so these are really just 2 pieces of that sort of soft foamy stuff. It's squishy. So you can see I can kind of bend it. And what we did was just to put an adhesive in between the 2. So we used red on one side and green on the other. We're at the middle level, so we're using green for positive numbers in some cases, and then red for negative integers. But there's different applications for this even at the elementary level. And so really we just glued the sheets together and then cut them using paper cutters into strips and then cut the strips into squares. So, but again, you can also buy these if that's what you prefer to.
Oh, that's great. I love that you made them. Sounds like a fun activity.
My principal gets very creative. She's much more crafty than I
And do you have some suggestions for parents who want to work on these math skills at home? It sounds like this parent maybe wants to use tiles like that. Are there other creative ways that parents can either like do math in a fun way or help their children better understand or practice those math facts that you were talking about?
Yes, I do think it. This can be hard. I think it's easier to practice reading skills at home by reading with your kids and enjoying a story together. With the math, you have to get creative, and it really depends on the age of your child. So for younger elementary students, one of the things that I see so often is we're really moving, I think, into a cashless society. And so kids are really struggling with identifying coins and understanding how coin denominations work together and work with the bills and that type of thing. So giving your child a few dollars in cash at the grocery store and asking them to figure out, okay, you can pick out any treat you want as long as it's under $2, but you have to figure out that you have enough money for it before we get up to the register, that type of thing. And then have them actually pay for it, try to figure out how much, is this going to cost? How much change do you think you're going to get back? Depending, again, on the age of the child, you can start to include the idea of interest. How much are we paying on this in addition to the cost of the item? Cooking is another sort of old but good way to practice math skills as well, particularly related to fractions. So if you are cooking something and you want to try to double a recipe or cut it in half, really involve your child in that and have them figure out with you, okay, if this is calling for a quarter of a cup of milk and we're doubling it, how much milk are we going to put in? And actually, pouring that milk into that glass measuring cup and seeing that 2/4, okay, yeah, it's equaling a half. Those types of things, they're very hands-on. They're totally real-life scenarios, and kids really enjoy them. They're not going to struggle against it as much as, okay, here's another worksheet for you to work on tonight. So those kinds of real life applications. The other one that I see very frequently now, in fact, educators are starting to talk about whether we should even stop teaching kids how to read an analog clock, the old school round clock face, because so many children cannot read them. They don't see them as frequently. It used to be that was the only type of clock that we were exposed to. So, that's another one in terms of, being sure that you have analog clocks in your house and maybe kind of just asking, every once in a while, okay, let's compare. What time is it right now? And maybe at the start, you can compare it to the microwave. That's okay, but ultimately, let's try to figure it out without seeing the digital time alongside. I think also basic fact practice is something, again, because it is so important and it is strengthened by frequent repetition. It's something that often in school, we just don't have time to devote that some kids really need, that, daily exposure to those basic facts. So to me, the least painful ways to do that are old school flashcards, which definitely still work. Then some of the apps and online games work very well too. So I really like one called SumDog, which is SUM, like the sum of an equation. SumDog has a free version for parents that you can use. It's very cartoony and fun for kids. There are some other subscription-based websites that, again, are very good. I really like firstinmath.com. Often that's implemented at the school level. If your child's school uses that, I think it's something that you really need to take advantage of. It's an awesome resource, huge numbers of drills for the basic facts.
Oh, thank you for those specific recommendations. That's always very helpful. We have a parent who's asking about accommodations for their middle schooler. And they're asking, their child has dyslexia and dyscalculia, is in 7th grade. Their son is struggling with math and can barely handle multiplication. Do you have ideas of how to help this child, or if accommodations would be helpful, what type of accommodations might be used? Oh, and I should clarify, for people who are watching, we didn't talk about accommodations very much, but if your child does have a learning disability or an individualized education plan in special education, then they are able to get some accommodations that can help support them in their classes. And so that's what this parent is asking about, what types of accommodations could be helpful.
Right. Okay. So this is really a tough situation, and unfortunately many kids and many families are facing this for sure. And I don't think there is any one single answer. I think that for many kids, if things like basic multiplication are still a struggle, which again is not uncommon. So I mean, just to put that out there, this child is not the only one struggling with that. So I'm assuming that work has been done to try to help this child, master those basic facts. So if that has not been effective up to this point, I would say, okay, look, we're moving over to the calculator. It's 7th grade. We really will all have calculators with us because they're on our phones at the very least, right? So I would give up the fight on the basic facts at that point. But I would also start to just look at, okay, how is the conceptual understanding going for this child? So sometimes kids in this boat are struggling with those basic building block elements like the multiplication and the computational completion of the problems, but they can understand abstract mathematical concepts very well. So if that's the case, we really need to focus on things that are going to truly accommodate. So definitely calculator use, which I'm sure is already happening. I think my next question would be if the whole situation is just really disintegrating and the child is also struggling, is struggling really in all areas of math. At that point, we start to get into a situation where a child is functioning at, let's say, a 2nd or 3rd grade level in math, but being expected to do 7th grade level math work. So in my opinion, at that point, we really need to focus on trying to bridge that gap systematically between those foundation skills that the student has and the level of math that they are in. So that's done through really strategically identifying where the student is now, building up the skill deficiencies from that level, and trying to continually get closer. So that could be done if you're working on, let's say, linear equations in 7th grade math, which is going to be a very difficult concept for this student. We can back that down, all the way to the components at the 2nd grade level, let's say, and sort of pre-teach that skill, which can be an accommodation in itself, right? Building up from those earlier levels prior to the 7th grade content instruction. It's very difficult, it's tough for everybody. So another approach that is effective for some students is to say, okay, let's not worry about 8th grade, 7th grade math. We're not worried about Algebra 1 right now. We're trying to work on more fundamental skill instruction. And in that case, the child might go into an adaptive math situation where they are not learning the on-grade level content. But it's a decision you've got to make really carefully, because that will then have ramifications for future math science classes, SAT testing at the college level, that type of thing. So it's really something to talk through on an individual basis with your child's case manager, really find out all of the options that are available within the school district to support kids who are significantly off level in math, and try to see what will be most effective for that individual child.
I really like how you broke that down and talked about, of course, it depends on each individual child and what their goals are, and where they are in their conceptual or their just general understanding of math and the class that they're in. And of course, if they are understanding the general concepts and ideas that are being covered, then providing accommodations or tools like a calculator that can help them with those basic facts can allow them to stay with the class and keep up with everything that they're being taught. But then conversely, if they're not understanding that material, then we might need to back it up and see what sort of pre-teaching needs to be done, or if that child even needs to be in a different class or get extra support outside of math class with those concepts. So thank you for breaking that down. We had a parent question about tests and assessments. And so she says that her son studies really hard, but then bombs the test and doesn't do well on the test. Do you have any ideas for preparing students for assessments? And I'm assuming this child must be understanding the information outside of the test, so this seems kind of like a surprise.
Okay. So, and partially this depends on the age of the child.
Sure.
But for this type of question, I would actually first say, I think it's really important to check in with the child's classroom teacher. Okay, so, what is the teacher seeing in terms of, is the child successful on other tasks? Doing okay in class on whatever practice methods are being used. What does the teacher think might be the reason for the lack of transfer of that understanding on some assignments, but then not in the testing situation? It could be the format that the test is given in is not matching the practice that the student is doing. And so perhaps there's a disconnect there for the student as far as, gosh, I understood it when I did it this way, but now I'm looking at this test and it doesn't look familiar to me at all. There could be a test anxiety component to this, for sure. As far as, hey, I'm fine. I could do this same set of problems, no problem at home, but then I get into the testing situation and I freeze up. And that's not necessarily a math issue. It's more of a test anxiety concern, which of course would be handled in a different way. But I think the first step really is kind of talking to the teacher, talking to the child. Sometimes it's easier for the conversation with the child to be with a neutral third party, because sometimes the child feels very defensive and upset. And, sometimes that conversation with the parent can go off the rails because the child gets upset, whereas with a teacher or a tutor or that type of person, it will be a little bit of a calmer interaction. But those would be my suggestions just for the information that you shared.
Yeah. So really about getting to the bottom of why is this happening, and trying to figure out what's causing this so that you can intervene in some sort of way. Mm-hmm. We had several parents that were asking about the graphic organizers that you mentioned, and I dropped a link in the comments box of an article we have on Understood that has some examples of graphic organizers for math. But I wanted to give you the opportunity, if you had any suggestions for parents as they're looking at graphic organizers or other tools that might help their kids, like graph paper, or I don't know what other ideas you might have. I wanted to give you the opportunity to give any last words of advice on that or on math in general.
Sure. I think the ones that you mentioned are really at the top of my list for sure. And the graphic organizers can get very detailed depending on the particular age level and skill that you're working on. So there's such a wide variety in terms of graphic organizers that could be helpful. But I'm glad that you brought up the graph paper. Graph paper is so useful beyond just that idea of graphing shapes. So it works very well if you get the larger, even 1 inch size or the larger 1/4 inch size for elementary students, for example. Often even through middle school and high school, if a student is struggling with fine motor skills, that is a very good way to help students write out multi-digit numbers and equations and keep their work a little bit neater and more organized. So if you're adding 392 plus 243, writing each one of those digits in a box, that first number on the top row, and then right below it, 243 in those 3 individual boxes, then drawing your line and writing your answer in each one of those individual boxes below is a great way just to help kids stay organized and really be sure that they, sometimes in math, it's very common that it's those little careless errors that can be, even, oh boy, I drew this too fast and my 0 looks like a 6 or whatever it might be, or my numbers are squished together and the teacher can't read them. So just visually spacing things out in that manner can be a huge help. And we definitely use those types of materials through the middle school level for all of our students to help them just really keep their work more organized.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we definitely, when I was teaching at the high school level, graph paper can be useful there too, just in lining, especially for the kids that had ADHD or executive function issues. Lining things up and keeping track of where everything is was really difficult, and sometimes that was helpful.
Exactly.
Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been really informative, and we appreciate you being here. And to all of our viewers, thank you so much for joining us. If you missed any part of this chat, it is recorded. It will be available on YouTube and also on our site, and you can find it on our site at u.org/calendar. And that will also show you all of our upcoming chats as well as the previous chats that have been recorded. If you had a question today that didn't get answered or more questions have come up along the way, you can join our community where lots of other families and parents are supporting each other, giving each other advice, and sometimes our experts like Elizabeth pop in there as well to answer questions. You can find that at u.org/community. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you.